guys, welcome back to A Simple Sacred Home. Today we're doing a really casual video, but I wanted to share with you my labor and delivery or my birth story for our baby girl. I watched a ton of these videos when I was trying to get pregnant and when I was pregnant, and what I found is that you either heard the stories where everything went exactly according to plan, or you hear the horror stories. So I had a lot of fear and not knowing what to expect when I went into my labor and delivery experience, and so I thought it would be fun to share my story as somebody who basically everything that I had planned did not go to plan. But I still had a really positive experience, and so I thought it'd be fun to share that with you guys today. If you didn't see last week's video, last week I shared the story of how we even got to this point, so if you want to see that video, you can check it out. I'll have it linked above here as well as in the description below. I recommend watching that one if you want to know a little bit more about the backstory of how we got here. So if you haven't seen any of my previous videos, I have mentioned in the past that before ever getting pregnant with this baby, I had desired to have a home birth, and I always desired to have an unmedicated birth. So my mom had both me and my brother without any epidural, without any pain medication whatsoever. And so growing up, I always had that example. And so I wanted to do that myself. And then ever since I was in my early 20s, I had the desire to have a home birth. I felt called to a home birth, and that was my plan if things could go according to my plans. That was what I went into this pregnancy with. I had met with a home birth midwife and I was all on board. My husband was on board with it. And so that was our plan going in, but we also were fully aware that there can be reasons why you won't end up being able to have a home birth, but that was our plan. That was the ideal circumstance. So around 12 weeks, I would say, I had something come up in early pregnancy which made me think that I was not going to be able to have a home birth. I had to go see a specialist and have some testing done, and I was pretty convinced that that was going to make it impossible for me to have a home birth, because I thought during birth I was going to have additional monitoring. So I was referred to a specialist, I had tests ran, and then around 20 weeks we found out that actually I probably could do the home birth if that was still something that I was interested in. So the door was, what I thought was closing, was back open, and I was really excited to proceed with that plan. So once everything was cleared with the specialist and they were like, yeah, you don't need any extra monitoring when you're in labor unless you start to experience symptoms, which at that case, if I was, my home birth midwife assured me it could be monitored at home. Obviously, if something alarming came up, then we could transfer to the hospital. So I was still on board for the home birth. I felt like it was the Lord's way of opening that door back up, and I was really excited. But there was a few other hurdles that we had to cross once I was cleared by the specialist, and those hurdles did not work out the way that I planned. So basically I had hurdle after hurdle that I had to cross to try to get this home birth to work, and I was getting doors shut left and right. And I had been praying to the Lord that he would open doors if I wasn't supposed to have the home birth, or close other doors if I was. And because I was so drawn to home birth, I really did everything in my power to try to make home birth work. So I really saw these doors closing, or like these stumbling blocks, and thinking, well, I want to do everything in my power to say that I exhausted all my options to try to make the home birth work. And so that's what I did. And I was just praying to the Lord during that time, like, Lord, it seems like these doors are closing, but I want to make sure that they're actually closing and that I'm not just giving up because it's hard. And so I just asked the Lord to make it very clear if this wasn't the route that I was supposed to go. I didn't know why it wouldn't be the route that I was supposed to go, but I prayed for that. Every single door just shut. Just surrendered and realized that at least for this particular birth, home birth was not going to be the option, and so I was going to be delivering in the hospital. Once I knew that I was going to be giving birth in the hospital, I was really trying to prepare for that. So I still wanted to go unmedicated. I still wanted to labor at home as long as possible. I wanted to not get in the car too early, not get to the hospital too early, all the things that you hear. And because this was my first labor, I was pretty nervous because the hospital was about an hour away from our home. So I was really nervous about giving birth in the car. My mom had both me and my brother really quickly, and we both came early. And so I was really nervous about, going from 0 to 100, which I know they say with your first birth, that doesn't really happen, but I was worried about that. And so I was just trying to process those fears with the Lord, with my doula. And yeah, basically I wanted to have as little interventions as possible. So I didn't want to be induced. I didn't want any cervical checks. I wanted to have a water birth if possible. And the way that my hospital worked, there was one water birth tub. So if nobody else was using it and you wanted to use it, you would be given the green light to use it. But if somebody else was using it, unfortunately, then you couldn't use it. So my plan going into birth was to do a water birth. And if that didn't work out, I was going to use the Bradley method. During her prenatal visits, my midwife was awesome. And she asked if I had a birth plan. She recommended not calling it a birth plan, but calling it your birth preferences, because things do happen where you might have planned for something, but it doesn't go that way. And then it can feel like a big disappointment if you have to pivot, or it can feel like your birth wasn't a positive experience. So she recommended calling it birth preferences and just being open-handed that things don't always go to plan. And that I knew from listening to the millions of stories, not millions, but I listened to a lot of birth stories. You hear a lot of women say like, I wanted to do this and it didn't go as planned and blah, 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 blah. So I knew, especially with wanting to have the home birth too, I knew that there was a possibility of needing to transfer or something happening and things not working out as planned. So I would say that I was pretty open-handed with it, but I definitely had preferences and things that I really wanted to happen. So basically I went to my 38-week appointment, and my midwife, at that point I was seeing her every week, and at that point she had said, do you want to get a membrane sweep or anything like that? And like I said, I didn't want any intervention. So at 38 weeks I was like, don't want to do anything, just want to see what happens. I had no signs of labor. So for my particular practice or the hospital's guidelines, I'm not sure which one it was, but they consider an involuntary induction 41 weeks and 5 days, and anything before that is voluntary. I knew that I had to deliver, by choice or not, by 41 weeks and 5 days. So I just was pretty confident that I would go into labor naturally before then. And so at the 38-week appointment, I didn't do anything. 39-week appointment, didn't do anything. 40-week came and I still had 0 signs of labor, nothing that would make me think labor was approaching. Obviously my water didn't break. I wasn't having even Braxton Hicks contractions, literally nothing. And so at the 40-week appointment, I started to get nervous because I was like, okay, we're at 40 and I really didn't want to go past 41 weeks. I know so many women give birth at 41 weeks in 1 day, 41 weeks in 3 days, 41 weeks in 5 days, and their body just goes into labor naturally at that time. But there is some research, and you can look into it and, make that decision for yourself. But there is some research that shows after 41 weeks that the chances of having complications that could be life-threatening to specifically baby do increase, and that was just something that I really did not want to even mess around with. I think that maybe if I hadn't had previous losses, I would have been more willing to wait to the 41 and 5 days and be basically forced to be induced. But in this case, I really was pretty anxious about going over 41 weeks. I had just been praying the whole time that I went into labor naturally, that I didn't need to be induced, and that this baby would come before 41 weeks. So at 40 weeks, I had the the membrane sweep. So at 40 weeks and 5 days, I remember getting ready for bed. We had just eaten dinner and I was sitting on the couch and I had some back pain, and obviously didn't think anything of it. You kind of have or can have back pain, especially that late into pregnancy. So I noticed a little bit of back pain, didn't think anything of it, but then it went away. And so still didn't really think anything of it, but then it came back and then it went away again. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's weird that I had this pain and then it went away and then it came back and then it went away again. So I kind of started to think maybe that was some kind of early sign of labor, maybe the beginning of what could be contractions. The entire time throughout my entire pregnancy, I was always wondering if I was going to have predominantly back labor because my mom had back labor with me. And so I started thinking, is this back labor? And so I was excited because I was like, maybe this is the beginning of labor and I'm not at 41 weeks. I forgot to mention that at the 40-week appointment, we did schedule a voluntary induction for 41 weeks and 1 day. So I was praying to the Lord that I would not make it to that date, that I would go into labor naturally beforehand. But if things weren't going the way that we were hoping for, that was the plan, was to be induced, because I did not want to take any additional chances with keeping her in there longer. So once again, I went to bed at 40 weeks and 5 days, went to bed, was thinking maybe I'll go into labor in the night. And then I woke up the next morning and I was very much still pregnant, no signs of labor, no signs of contractions. So I started to think maybe I wasn't even having contractions the night before and it was unrelated. And I remember waking up that morning and thinking, I have 2 more days until I'm going to be induced. And it was like early in the morning. I remember getting up that day. I had been doing a lot of the things that you can do to try to induce labor, walking on the treadmill that day. I climbed the stairs and I did like the side climb that you can do during pregnancy, similar to curb walking, but if you don't have a curb, you can do the stairs. That night around 5:30, started to have that back pain again, where it was there for like a very short amount of time and then it would go away and then it would come back. And so I was like, this is what I had last night. I wonder if this is the start of something, or maybe I'm going to have this for a few days and then I'm going to go into labor. I'm not sure. This time it did continue. So it was very manageable, nothing to write home about, but it was weird because it was on and then off, on and off. Once it was continuing to happen, on off, I did start tracking with a contraction app on my phone, and my midwife had told me not to start tracking too early. My doula recommended not tracking too early. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for how close together they were. So I remember from like 5:30 to 8:30, they would be like 18 minutes apart, 20 minutes apart, nothing crazy. And once again, they weren't like super painful. Like you could feel them, but nothing, like I said, to write home about. And then around 8:30, they definitely started to pick up. Not only were they stronger, but they were closer together. So they were going from like 18 to 20 minutes to closer to like 15 minutes, 11 minutes, and they were starting to come down a little bit. So that made me start to get nervous, only because I felt like they were getting stronger and closer faster than I was anticipating. My midwife had told me that a lot of times with first labors, the entire process is like 24 hours. Like 8:30 and 9:30, because I was feeling them, me and my husband decided, okay, this is probably them. They've been coming on and off for, you know, a few hours now, so we should try to get some rest because we're likely going to have this baby tonight or early the next morning. I laid down, I tried to get comfortable as much as I could, and they got to the point where laying down was not working out. So I should preface by saying, once again, I was having all contractions in my back. I had 0 contractions in the front. So didn't have any of that, what they call like period cramps times 100 or anything like that. No, this was all just extreme back pain. For whatever reason, when I would get those laying down was the most uncomfortable thing ever. Now, you hear a lot, especially with the Bradley method, that you want to lay down, you want to be in a relaxed state. If it's during the daytime, you want to try to like work through them and like stay busy and not just like lay down. But because it was at night, I wanted to try to rest, and obviously I'd been up the whole day, so I was actually tired, and I knew that if this was going to be labor, like I needed to get rest. So I tried to lay down from 8:30 to maybe like 10:30, but I could not stay laying down for the back pain once it started coming. I had called the midwife because I lived so far away, so she was like, yeah, just try to get some rest. I tried to lay back down for a couple hours, and it was not working out. Okay, so I was getting zero sleep because they were coming so close together at this point that I couldn't fall asleep because they were happening, and also I couldn't lay down. So every time I would be laying down, and then as soon as I would have one, I'd have to stand up because that was the only way that I could get through it, was like moving in different positions. 2:30 in the morning, where I got to the point they were anywhere from 5 minutes apart to closer to 3 minutes apart. Called the midwife back and said, yeah, they're getting really close together. I'd like to come in, at least get checked out. They said, you can come on in. So I had texted my doula, I had told my husband, and we decided to pack up and head to the hospital. So I think we got to the hospital around 4 o'clock by the time like we got out of the house and headed there. It was between 3:30 and 4 o'clock. And so we got there and I went in, I was checked, and I want to say that I was at 3 centimeters when I got there, which I definitely thought I was further along than that. My midwife that was on duty, she was basically like, all right, we're gonna have you stay and use this time to bounce on the ball, do some different exercises on the ball in the triage room, walk the halls, do all that kind of stuff for a couple hours. We'll check on you, see if you've made any progress, and then we'll go from there. After 2 hours, the midwife hadn't come back yet. And I'm like, where is she? And so we just waited it out for another hour. I was getting to the point where I was like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I truly told my husband, I was like, I don't think that I can do this. Like, I'm gonna need something for the pain, which was really hard for me to admit and to get to that place because that was so opposite of what I ever wanted. I didn't want to take any medicine at all. So I was like, but I'm so tired, like I can't lay down, I can't sit down when these are happening. I haven't slept for over 24 hours at this point. At the 3-hour mark, she ended up coming back in, and I had progressed to 4 centimeters dilated. So in 3 hours, I had progressed 1 centimeter, and I was actually pretty excited about that. I was like, okay, cool. We're moving, we're in the right direction, this is great, blah, blah, blah. So at that point, my midwife said, okay, you're 4 centimeters dilated. You were going to come back tomorrow to be induced anyway. So we have a room for you. We're just going to move you in here and you don't have to go home. And I was so excited about that. At that point, I started to talk to my midwife, and I was like, listen, I'm going to need something. I don't know what I need, but I need something. And at this point, I still didn't want to do an epidural, but I was like, I need something. So they offered, I want to say it's like Didol or something. I'm totally messing that up. I'll try to link it here if I can remember what it's called. But she had said, like, we can give you this. It goes through an IV, so it's not an epidural or anything like that. I hadn't ever heard of that, so I didn't really know, but I really didn't want an epidural. I was like very anti-epidural. I had looked up that the medication that they give you through the IV is a medication that does cross the placenta, and so that medication does get to your baby. And for me personally, I was not interested in that at all. The other option was the epidural, and I was very anti-epidural. I was always scared of just not being able to feel my legs. You hear the traumatizing stories of people who the epidural goes too high on, or the bad reactions and things like that. So, but from what I was made aware of with the epidural, the medicine is going into your body, but it doesn't cross the placenta, whereas the other medicine that they recommended at first as an alternative pain medicine, that one does cross the placenta and go to the baby. So I was like, okay, if something's going to happen, if there's going to be some kind of reaction or, you know, whatever, I'd rather be the one to have it in my system rather than it be something that can cross to the baby. I ended up deciding that I was going to get the epidural. I was very scared. I had no interest in getting the epidural, but what had ended up happening that I came to that conclusion is that once I moved to my actual laboring room and where I'd be delivering, it was another 3 to 4 hours from the time I got to the hospital to that point. It had been about 8 hours. And I went from, in the first 3 to 4 hours, I went from 3 centimeters dilated to 4 centimeters dilated. So I was hoping that between those 3 to 4 more hours that I was in getting settled into my new room, that I would have had at least progressed another centimeter up to 5. They checked me again and I had not progressed at all. So I was still at 4 centimeters. So in 4 hours, I was laboring, having these really intense back labor contractions, and I had not progressed at all. Basically, at that point, when I realized like we hadn't progressed at all, I was so tired. I have not slept at all. I was like, okay, I'm going to do the epidural. So thankfully, from watching other people's stories and things like that, I kind of brought up all my fears. So when the anesthesiologist came in, I had basically said like, I've heard the stories of when it goes too high up on people. I was like, I've never, you know, had an epidural before or anything like that. Like, I'm really nervous about being too numb where I can't feel anything. And I thankfully had a really amazing anesthesiologist. I was also really nervous because you have to sit super still. And I was like, how am I going to sit still through these contractions? Because I couldn't sit at all for my contractions. Like, I was always getting up, always moving through them. And they were like, oh yeah, you're gonna have to sit still for 20 minutes. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's gonna work out. So that made me nervous because I obviously didn't want to move while they were in the process of doing it. But I had a great anesthesiologist, I had great nurses, and so they're like, you can do it, you're gonna be fine. My nurse was like, honestly, you're handling the contractions really well. Like, we have women that are like flailing all over the place. Like, you're gonna be fine to sit through this for the few minutes that is needed. And I just basically brought up all my concerns to the anesthesiologist. She answered all my questions and I had peace about it at that point. I told her, I was like, from other stories I had heard, like there's different doses of the epidural that you can get. So I was like, please give me the lowest dose. Like, I still wanted to be able to feel my legs to some degree if I could. I didn't want to be so numb that like I didn't have any sensation in my legs. So I was like, can we do like the lowest dose possible and see if that works and whatnot? And so that's what they did. I think she said they normally do like 10 and they started me at an 8. Once I got the epidural, I was a lot happier. I was so nervous about the epidural. I was so nervous about any kind of reaction and all of that, but I felt so much better after because I was able to rest a little bit. I don't think I ever went to sleep, but I was able to lay down and like kind of close my eyes a little bit. Could still feel the contractions in my back, but the pain was muted, like extremely. Like, it took all the edge off and I could still feel them there. I could tell that I was having a contraction. I didn't really have to look at like a monitor. The monitor was always behind me, so I couldn't see it even if I wanted to look at it, but I could tell when I was having a contraction. My midwife had mentioned, because I hadn't progressed, about Pitocin, which I never wanted to have Pitocin. I never wanted to be induced, all that kind of stuff. Because you're not progressing, give you some Pitocin that should hopefully pick things up. And so at that point, it had been several hours later and I said, yeah, I'll do the Pitocin. I got the lowest dose of Pitocin and they started that process. That Pitocin, from what I understand, helps the contractions get closer together. Your baby's sunny side up, which I had known this for a while, but we really want to try to change her position. It'll make things a lot easier for you during birth. And so that was also why I was feeling so much pain in my back. They had me do a few different positions to encourage the baby to turn. And so that's what they did. And that was really hard because they had me like get up on all fours and do all these positions. And because of the epidural, like I couldn't feel one of my legs. And then my back, like I could feel the contractions in my back. And the epidural, like I said, I had it on a lower dose. And so that's how I wanted it. But I still at times had like a good amount of pain where I was having to breathe through the contractions because it didn't take everything away. But I was okay with that because it did a very good job of taking all the edge off. But there were times where the epidural maybe was like starting to fade because I didn't press the button or something like that. And I could feel a good amount. But it was still much better than not having it. I started feeling contractions in the front, and so I was like, she had to have moved because I can feel them in the front now. I have never felt any contractions this entire time in the front. I only had them in my back. Honestly, everything from there was a blur. I think the last time that I remember getting checked, I was at a 4, and then the next time I checked, hours had gone by, but the next time I was checked, it was, "Are you ready to push out the baby?" And I was like, yeah, let's do this. Doula was like, "You're probably gonna push for a few hours." Like the first birth, a lot of women push for a long period of time. So she was like, maybe the early morning hours, like tomorrow you'll have the baby, because it was probably like 9 o'clock at this point. So she's like, maybe. I'm like, "Are we gonna have this baby tonight?" And my doula was like, "Maybe, but probably like more, 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning." And I was like, "Oh, okay." My midwife was like, "All right, we're gonna start pushing." I pushed 4 times, and in less than 10 minutes, she was here. That was the coolest experience. Obviously, she was a lot smaller than we thought. So I'm really grateful to God that she didn't come early, because she definitely needed the time in there to continue to grow. And so I was really grateful that she didn't come any earlier than she did. And I'm so grateful to God that I started to go into labor naturally and didn't have to be completely induced from scratch. I had the best team of nurses, truly. Honestly, a godsend was the nurse who helped deliver the baby. At first I was very nervous because she was basically very no nonsense. So she was like, "This is what we're doing, this is how it's gonna go, blah blah blah." And I was like, not about that. I was like, oh boy, this is not gonna go well. But God truly sent her to be my nurse for the labor and delivery, because anything to do with hospitals, anything to do with medical, I'm very like anxious about. I don't know why. That's a new thing within the last so many years. But yeah, anything medical, anything hospital related really gives me a lot of anxiety. And so I had a lot of fear being in there, and I had a lot of fear about what was going to happen or what wasn't going to happen. And that particular nurse that helped deliver the baby was exactly who I needed. She was basically like, "Don't be scared. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. Your baby's going to be here. Everything's going to be great." And as much as at first I was like hesitant, she ended up being exactly who I needed, because she really helped me snap out of my fear and just focus on, your baby's coming and this is what we got to do, and we're having this baby tonight, and we're not going to keep progressing things and take longer than we need to. Like, she's coming and this is what we're doing. And so I look back and I thank God so much for her, because truly she was sent directly from God to be my nurse. And I'm so grateful also, because I ended up finding out later that she was actually a Christian. So that was really cool. I had no idea during the labor or the delivery, but I ended up finding out later that she was a Christian, and that was really exciting. That was so evidently the Lord that he put us together. That is the story of how she got here. I know that was kind of all over the place. I hope you could track with me, but basically what I wanted to really reiterate here is that labor and delivery and the whole birth process is so sacred, and it's very humbling because you can, and praise God if you have a plan for your labor and delivery and it goes exactly as planned. I had such clear things that I wanted to happen or didn't want to happen, and basically everything that I wanted to happen didn't, and everything that I didn't want to happen happened. However, the outcome was still beautiful. I had a beautiful labor and delivery. I look back and had a really positive experience. I'm not regretful for how things went at all. If I ever have another baby, I would still like to try the home birth route. I'd still like to try a natural route, no epidural, I should say. But I have less of a stigma towards the epidural, and I understand why women get it. And it was just a very humbling experience to be there, and basically everything I thought I would do didn't go as planned, but God still had it be a beautiful and truly life-changing experience. I hope this gives you some peace to know, like, even if things don't go the way that you planned, ultimately at the end of the day, we want healthy babies and healthy mamas, right? Like, that is the end goal. And so at the end of the day, as long as we can get baby here healthy and safe and mom's healthy and safe, I think that's the ultimate prayer and hope and goal. But obviously have your preferences, have your things set, but also realize that if your plans or your preferences don't go the way that you planned for them, just be open-handed with that and just be prayerful, and know that it's okay to have to pivot or make changes to your original plan, and that's okay. That happens, and you can still have a beautiful experience, and you can still have a memorable experience. I'd love to answer any questions if you have questions down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any videos as I post a new video every week, and I'll see you guys in the next one.